Welcome to a Victory Monday edition of Dolphins In Depth, the podcast provided to you by the Miami Herald. I am your host, Miami Herald columnist Omar Kelly, and joining me is the illustrious Barry Jackson, fresh out of cell block, 38, 39?
It's 39 years at the Herald.
Yes, 39 years at the Herald. Barry, you're also going to be covering the Marlins' introduction of a new manager. Give the people some thoughts on that. So before we get into this,
his name is Clayton McCullough, and it's not going to matter because they're going through their 108th rebuilding project. So that's not particularly important. So, are you excited about 4-6? Are you excited about a playoff run? You know what? I didn't know who to root for last night with Bengals and Chargers. Part of me wanted Cincinnati to just totally be eliminated. Part of me wanted the Chargers to come back to the pack. So basically now the Dolphins are chasing the Chargers, who are sitting there at 7-3, Baltimore at 7-4, and the Denver Broncos at 6-5. So the Dolphins have to hop the Colts, which you wouldn't think would be too difficult, to somehow get that last playoff spot. But you never want to be chasing a Baltimore team. You never want to be chasing a Jim Harbaugh coach team. So it seems like overtaking the Broncos probably is your best and only chance, that narrow path to make the playoffs, no?
Yeah, you could lock up that AFC South. That AFC North. They're going to get two teams. Let's be real about this. Pittsburgh and Baltimore are both in. Right now, if you're worried about a team, it would have to be Denver. It would have to be the Chargers. I'm not even worried about the Colts. I'll get there when I get there, even though they do own the head-to-head matchup with you. So that's got to be a little bit concerning. But if you're the Dolphins, and I like their approach that they've had all season, you just need to worry about taking care of your own business and beating a bad Raiders team, which is basically a team that looks like a tanking team. You did what you were supposed to do. I wasn't even very comfortable with the nature of how they pulled off the victory, because right before that Jonnu Smith broken play, and that's exactly what it was. Bad teams give you these opportunities, and then obviously the Jalen Ramsey interception. It looked like it could be another fourth quarter collapse, Barry. It had me, as Joe Philbin would say, a little queasy.
Well, I'll tell you what's killing them. I'll tell you what's absolutely killing them is they're not getting good enough play at the safety spot opposite Javon Holland. Poyer, I guess there was a reason Buffalo moved on. Age has taken its toll. He's been a great player over the course of his career. He was burned again for 3 completions yesterday. So that's one thing that's hurting him. And also lack of getting to the quarterback. Now, to Chop's credit, 6 pressures yesterday, didn't get Gardner Minshew down, but he was the one pass rusher who was effective yesterday. Tyus Bowser played more than 30 snaps, not a single quarterback pressure. Quentin Bell, not a single quarterback pressure. Ogba rushed the quarterback 25 times, had 1 pressure, which resulted in a sack, but obviously he's limited by the biceps. So to me, that's what's keeping teams in games. You're just not getting good enough safety play, and your linebacker play is not quite good enough outside.
Let me counter you on this. And I get what you're saying about Bowser. I get what you're saying about Emmanuel Ogba. I'm proud of him for getting the sack and continuing to play with an injury that probably would have put a lot of players on IR. But they are very effective against the run lately. At 60 rushing yards to the Raiders, 60 rushing yards and 16 attempts. I think there are 2 things that are happening, and we're watching it coincide. The Dolphins are struggling running, and they've gotten very good against the run. Now, the problem is, to be very good against the run, you've got to have guys who aren't giving you much pass rushing on the field. And I'm okay with that. And I'm not okay with compromising and blitzing and being a very heavy blitz team just so that you can simulate pressure. Gardner Minshew's Gardner Minshew. I think maybe against tougher opponents later on in the season, maybe Jordan Love, maybe the 49ers. Stroud.
And Purdy, obviously, right.
It's going to become an issue that rears its head. But to me, that's not even the bigger issue on the plate for me. My biggest issue right now is the run game, because it is beginning to hemorrhage. Now, I don't know how much of that is a byproduct of the injuries that Teron and Rashad Jones and Robert Jones are playing with, the drop off from Austin Jackson to Kendall Lamb. I don't know what the issue is, but 3.2 yards per carry is not a good total. And
no, and I want to mention a couple things in the run game. Obviously, missing Ingold, that's a huge factor. Austin Jackson's athleticism helps you in the run game. If you believe the evaluations of Pro Football Focus, they rated every Dolphins player as a run blocker yesterday, as they do for every game. Teron Armstead graded out first. Liam and Robert Jones were in the middle of the pack. So was Aaron Brewer, who traditionally has been a very good run blocker. The very bottom four, Kendall Lamb, Tyreek Hill, Durham Smythe, Julian Hill. So Julian Hill, who had given you good run blocking for most of the season, has not been as effective as a run blocker recently. And I'm curious whether the tight end they claimed from Philadelphia, Jack Stoll, will eventually come in and take some of his playing time. We saw Julian Hill whiff on one block yesterday. He did have the 2 catches, which is rare for him. Durham Smythe's blocking, for whatever reason, has regressed this season. So it's very telling to me the 3 of their worst 4 blockers of every player who played on offense yesterday. Speaking of run blocking specifically, Kendall Lamb, Durham Smythe, Julian Hill. You combine that with not having Ingold, not having Austin Jackson in the Kendall Lamb spot, I think that's contributed to the drop in the running game. I do want to add that Kendall Lamb did play well overall. Anytime you can hold Max Crosby to 5 tackles, no sacks, is a very good game playing against an all-pro. So give Kendall Lamb his due for that. But to me, that's the reason why the running game's fallen apart. Ingold's value, I think, has really crystallized during his absence, no?
How many snaps does Ingold really play in a game? I have to think about this. But also,
he's been getting 15 to 25. Yeah, he's been getting.
Let's not short Julian Hill. Let's not short Julian Hill because he provided that seal block that allowed the Achane touchdown that I think was kind of a ceiling score. Is Julian Hill playing well? No, he's not. He's also battling the shoulder injury. He's wearing a red jersey in practice every day. So clearly this is an issue that's something that he has to fight through. Does that mean he needs to be more consistent on blocks? Yes, he does. I'm also a little bit worried about the Raheem Mostert hip injury. I'm sorry, a hip and a running back is a very bad combination. I know he continued to play, but let's not act like he didn't go in there and probably just take a shot. And there are consequences to that. Where will that lead forward? We'll talk to Mike McDaniel later today to kind of get a sense of what's going on from that standpoint. I'm a Alec Ingold fan, but are you telling me Alec Ingold is worth a yard a game more average? Is that what you're saying?
I think it's a combination of that, missing Austin Jackson's blocking, and also the interior of the line obviously has played above expectations this year, but they're probably regressing to the mean a little bit in terms of not being dominant players. Liam and Robert Jones, certainly serviceable NFL starters now, not dominating NFL starters. So I think that's a big factor. And here's a question for you. Everyone was on the Jalen White bandwagon for most of the season. Well, he's gained 8 yards on his last 10 carries, and you can look at all 10 of them over the last 2 games and say, look, someone was in the backfield immediately. I'm not sure what he could have done. All that's true, but the bottom line is he's produced nothing from his last 10 carries. So do you take a fresh look at Jeff Wilson during this new magical era of Dolphins football where they play the players who earn it, as we've seen with Anthony Walker over David Long, as we've seen with Julian Hill over Durham Smythe, as we've seen with
over Cam Smith,
over everyone else. Exactly, Storm Duck yesterday over Cam Smith. Does Jeff Wilson deserve a fresh look? And do you say, we know Jalen Wright can play, he's got a great future, but he's done nothing the last 2 games. Mostert, obviously, the 3 carries for -2 yards yesterday. Do you inject Jeff Wilson, or do you think the value of what Jalen Wright can do because of the speed, because of the receiving ability, you should continue playing him despite the lack of production the last 2 weeks?
I am of the opinion that this needs to be a youth movement moving forward. The Devon Achans, the Malik Washingtons, the Jalen Wrights, the Cam Smith, the Storm Ducks. I'm not living in delusion land to think that this team won't slip up and lose 2 games. And then once we do lose 2 games, what is the season going to be about when we look at the end of the product and say, did our young players develop? And if the answer is no to that, then it's a wasted season. So I'm all about continue to invest in Jeff Wilson. But you know my stance. I want a healthy Raheem Mostert. I know how important and valuable he is. And I know he's in Mike McDaniel's doghouse at the present moment. I don't know if he would have gotten out of it if it hadn't been for the hip injury. I know this team is Devon Achane is the leading back for this team at this present moment. But I cannot and will not and shall not ignore the contribution that Raheem Mostert has made the last 2 years and think that this guy's washed up and cannot contribute more. Now, the question is he healthy? We'll see. But I think there are bigger fish to fry, even though the run game is at the very top of my concern list. There are bigger issues to fry, the bigger fish to fry in regards to quarterback play, how efficient he's playing, and is this good enough? Right now, Barry, I would compare Tua Tagovailoa and how he's playing to Chad Pennington of 2008. And here is why. Because with that Chad Pennington team, you were dinking and dunking. You were 10 or more play drives. It was basically don't make a mistake. Get the ball to the open man and don't make a mistake. And that's what we've seen from Tua this season. Now, whether it's a byproduct of how defenses are playing you, and I make the argument defenses play the Cincinnati Bengals and Minnesota Vikings the exact same way, and somehow their playmakers find ways to deliver big productive games. I think, do you prefer the efficiency over the explosiveness?
I would like both, but you have to be impressed with Tua over these last 4 games. To put it in perspective, over these 4 games, he's completed 101 of 130 passes, 78%. That leads the league by far. I know a lot are checkdowns. I understand that. But still, 78% of your passes being completed is an awfully impressive number. 112 passer rating over those 4 games. Since he's come back from the concussion over 4 games, they're 29 for 48 on third down conversions, 60%. That's a phenomenal number. They've scored on 21 of their 32 possessions in the 4 games since he's been back. He's playing at a really high level. And I got to tell you, Omar, what surprised me yesterday. When I tweeted that Dolphins fans, even despite concerns about Tua's durability, even despite valid concerns about how he plays against great defenses, the Dolphins fans should appreciate what they have in Tua because there's nobody better walking through that door. I was surprised by the blowback to that tweet because it seems to me that there's going to be a segment of Dolphins fans. I don't know if it's 20%. I don't know if it's 30% because social media skews everything. But there's a significant segment who apparently feel like if you don't have Josh Allen or Mahomes, you should simply throw your arms up in the air and keep drafting a quarterback in the first round every year. Maybe they include Burrow and Herbert, and obviously Lamar Jackson in that group as well. So if you don't have one of those 5, there's a segment of fans that say keep drafting a first-round quarterback every year till you find someone. And I can make the case for picking quarterback high in the draft just to have someone there in case, God forbid, Tua has repeated head injuries. But I don't understand the thinking where Dolphins fans can't appreciate what they have, knowing that there's no realistically available better option. If you had a chance to grab Cam Ward, of course an argument could be made. But you've made the financial investment in Tua. It's irreversible for the next couple of years. So why the simmering dissatisfaction? Why is there always this Josh Allen and Mahomes envy?
It's right, Barry. It's never good enough, and it will never be good enough. I've come to terms with that. And if you look at what the Lions are doing now, and I don't want to compare Tua to Jared Goff, because they're not the same quarterback. But Jared Goff is just playing at an efficiently high level right now. It helps that he's in his 3rd year in the same offense. Helps that he has comfort and familiarity with the weaponry. Everything is sinking. That was my hope for what we would see from Tua this year, and I think we are still seeing it now. Yes, would I love the big play to be added to the ingredient? Would I love the run game to be added to the ingredient? I'm like, literally, we've had one big run this season, this entire season. Think about this.
It's been 4 runs of 20 yards or more. 4 runs of 20 yards or more. Total plays of 20 yards or more. They were lowest in the league entering yesterday, which is just staggering. At some point, they're going to need quick scores because you're not going to prolong these drives against the Kansas City defense in all likelihood or a Baltimore defense as you did against some of these weaker opponents recently.
Yeah, but the efficiency level that Tua is playing with right now is probably top tier. And there is no shame in being a Matt Ryan-esque quarterback. The question is,
Right.
can you eventually get them over the top when that opportunity presents itself? I will say this. I like what Tua is doing offensively. I like the 73% completion. I like the 7.5 yards per attempt, which is actually ranked 12th. I looked that up today just because I was curious. And in terms of, everybody's like, we're not getting much run after catch. But if you're getting 7.3 per pop, that's respectable. What I would like to see and what worries me is when you're trailing and you need a hurry up score, can you do it? And my answer to that question right now is no. And that's a little bit concerning. That's a little bit troubling. And you're going to need that in games against Houston, in games against the 49ers, in games against Green Bay. And that to me is the next level for this offense. Now, the question is, can they get there? They've clearly got the weaponry. They're paying. They've got the most expensive receiving duo in the NFL. Question is, why are you not getting more out of Jalen Waddle? Why are you not getting more out of Tyreek Hill? And maybe that's a byproduct of, hey, you're getting as much as you can get out of Jonnu Smith. Now you're starting to get elevation from the number 3 receiver, whether it be Odell Beckham or Malik Washington. Your back is leading your team in receptions, and it's not a bad contribution what he does for you. 7.8 yards, 7.6 yards per reception. The question is, can you score quickly when you need to? And that's what these hurry up 2-minute drives. That's where I'll be a little bit concerned about what we do offensively. But to put things in perspective, are they solid for where they are right now? Yes, they are. But clearly there's work that still needs to be done.
Yeah, I would make this point with regard to 2-minute offense. Obviously, we need far more evidence that the Dolphins can score quickly. If they get the ball down 4 points with 2 minutes left in a game, can they score right now? It's dubious. But the one thing I would say that makes me feel a little bit better about their chances of doing it this year than last year is the exceptional safety valve they have now with Jonnu Smith, where if defenses are guarding the middle of the field and safety's playing deep in the final 2 minutes, you can dump the ball off to Achane, obviously, who has only 2 drops in his entire NFL career. His hands are really good. And Jonnu Smith is one of the best yak tight ends in football, as we've seen the last 5 weeks. So those two make me feel a little bit better about how you would do a 2-minute trailing 2-minute spots. And the other thing that would make me feel pretty good would be Odell Beckham can still create separation more than the receivers they've had here as number 3s and number 4s the last 2 years, like Cedric Wilson. We've seen it on a few catches the last 2 weeks. And they have a piece of Malik Washington, who also showed late in the Rams game last week with that big catch that he's also probably better than what they had. So because of those 4 weapons, I think there's a chance they're going to be better in 2-minute spots than they have been in the past. Obviously, the one game where they rallied last year against Dallas, they had more than 2 minutes. They had several minutes to mount a drive that was deliberate. And
I don't worry about the several minute drive. I don't worry about the several minute drive. It's a 2 minute.
Right.
I worry about
pass protection. Obviously, has to hold up. Right, because we're not going to see from Tua in all likelihood the magic that Mahomes can pull off, even though he's playing with 2 terrible tackles, the magic he can pull off in the pocket to be able to prolong drives. So that's going to remain a question until they're in that spot. But as far as Tua and Matt Ryan, I think that's a very good comparison. So if you have a quarterback that's outside the top 6 or 7 in the league, what you need for a prolonged playoff run is a ton of good decisions around the quarterback. So to me, the future of the franchise boils down to 2 things in the next 3 or 4 years. A, can Tua stay healthy? And B, does Chris Greer's batting average in the draft and with free agent signings increase? Because it appears as if Chris Greer is going nowhere. So if it can increase, and I know everybody's skeptical, if it can, then you can build a team that potentially could win a playoff game or 2. But that's the big question to me, because we pretty much know what Tua is now. He is a very good NFL quarterback. He's not a great NFL quarterback. So when you have that quarterback in the 6 to 12 range in the league, you need a ton of other good decisions around him, and that will determine where this franchise goes.
Yeah. Let me address something that you just touched on, the Chris Greer and building the roster construction. And this is something that I've dived into and done a lot more research on in the past coming weeks, because I'm trying to get to the root of what the problem is. And I think the piece that I wrote on Sunday, which primarily focused on Cam Smith, which didn't even start and replace Kendall Fuller, it was Storm Duck, was a perfect example. Now, when I'm looking at that piece, Barry, it showed that I was looking at the retention rate of Chris Greer's draft picks. And do you know that they've got 30 draftees, 35% retention rate of picks that Chris Greer has made since 2016. A lot of people say, well, that's not a fair assessment because he wasn't really in charge of the team in 2016. And I call bull crap on that because he was the man in charge of the draft. And when there was infighting on the Minkah Fitzpatrick selection, you know who made the final call? It was Chris Greer. And we could say whatever we want about what happened and whether they should have traded down and whether or not they should have gone after Lamar Jackson. But it was Chris Greer that made the final call and selected Minkah Fitzpatrick, who was a Pro Bowl player. Not here with the team, but he was still a Pro Bowl player. But the bigger problem to me, Barry, is when you have a 35% retention rate, okay, well, how does that compare to the better teams? The Baltimore Ravens have a 64.1% retention rate. The San Francisco 49ers have a 64.2% retention rate. The Philadelphia Eagles, the Kansas City Chiefs have a 54.7% retention rate. So do the Bills. The Steelers, 50.9% retention rate. And so when I say retention rate, this isn't about starters. This is just about your draft picks actually panning out and being respectable players. The Cam Smiths and the Channing Tindalls of the world, not the Eric Uzukamas. When the good teams are hitting 50% and you're hitting 35%, then you know what you have to do as a byproduct of that, Barry? You've got to go sign free agents. You got to go trade for players. You got to go pay players big, decent, respectable contracts, as opposed to having a rookie on your salary for cheap wages for 4 years. And then we get to the point where, well, why are we always capped out every offseason? Why are we always having these financial troubles? Why is our roster so old? Why is our roster so fragile? Well, it's because you're not drafting well enough. And then you're not developing players well enough. So even though I'm not putting Cam Smith's issues on the coaching staff, because if Storm Duck outperformed them, Storm Duck outperformed them. And I don't care who plays as long as the best guy who earned the job plays. But when you're whiffing on second and third and fourth round picks, and then you got to go address it in free agency and supplement it with trades and roster wire claims, that's not building a healthy roster. And then you wonder why you're not competing with these teams.
Right. And as you said, it was just so damaging that a starter couldn't emerge from their highest picks the last few years in terms of Cam Smith. They had to go out and spend money on a corner because Smith didn't develop. Tyndall, they had to go out and spend money on inside linebackers because Tyndall didn't develop. There are a couple other things in play also. Some of their best guys that Greer did identify were ones they let get away after a rookie contract with Van Ginkel and Rob Hunt, understandably with Hunt at $100 million and Wilkins at the top of the list. And also some guys that you identified as Greer's top draft picks haven't been quite as good as they initially appeared because of injury factors in large part. That's the case with Jalen Phillips. Chris Collinsworth said, I see perennial Pro Bowl potential in this guy. I talked to him after the draft. He thought he was the best defensive player in that draft. We thought he'd be that kind of guy, but now with the Achilles and the ACL, you wonder what he will be moving forward. And Javon Holland, obviously slowed by injuries, hasn't taken that next step to an all-pro or even a Pro Bowl caliber player. So even some of the picks that we thought Greer hit on haven't been quite as good as we thought it was going to be, and obviously just totally whiffing on the Noah pick and whiffing on the Channing Tindall pick and nothing from Ezukama, and jury out still on what they have with Patrick Paul and the guys in this draft. The one thing you can say about his drafting is he found a really good running back with a value pick with A-Shane, so give him credit for that. With Tua, at least he found a quarterback who's good, even though you can always say, should he have taken Herbert instead? But that whole group of picks that they got for Tunsil, Austin Jackson at 18 ended up being not a bust, not a great pick. So Noah obviously was a disaster. So yes, it's fair for every Dolphin fan to wonder why the drafting has not been better under Chris Greer. I always go back, obviously, to Charles Harris over Watt. To me, if I were an owner of a team and my GM picked Charles Harris over Watt, I would say you don't deserve to be a GM any longer. But Steve Ross is extraordinarily patient. He loves Chris Greer, and I would hope everybody has a boss as patient as Stephen Ross when it comes to your top a football executive hasn't done a terrible job. We all can agree the drafting can be better. And I think the pessimism of Dolphins fans, Omar, is the result of the belief of the fan base, many of them, not all of them, that Chris Grier is incapable of having a higher batting average on draft picks, because we've seen now an extended body of work where it hasn't been good enough. So I think that's what gives us pessimism about the future. But until Steve Ross shares that pessimism, then nothing's going to change.
Yeah, I'll wait till the end of the season, because I think ultimately, if this team doesn't produce a winning record, Chris Grier should not retain his job. I'm not even so heavy on the playoff picture, because I think they dug themselves, as Calais Campbell said in his post-game speech, they dug themselves a big hole, and it's going to be hard for them to dig themselves out of it, but it's still possible. But the injuries, we're approaching December football, and we know December football is when your team starts to fall apart because of injuries. So we'll see how that plays out. But the young players have to step up. They have to consistently produce and consistently become contributors, and we'll see how that pans out for this team. Let's get into this week's opponent, which is the New England Patriots, now under new leadership in Drake May. They just suffered a tough loss this week. Obviously, the Dolphins beat them earlier this season with their backup quarterback. Do you think that the Patriots have any chance of coming in here into Hard Rock Stadium and sort of destroying Miami's season? Because that's what a loss would do.
I have a little bit of concern, even though Tua has dominated the Patriots, even though they're rebuilding, even though their roster is not very good. My concern is that Drake May has played better recently. 30 for 40 against the Rams yesterday, threw for nearly 300 yards, threw a touchdown, only had one interception. He's also mobile, the type of quarterback that's given the Dolphins trouble. He's averaging 9.2 yards per rush. So because of Drake May's development, I'm a little queasy about this game. I think we still think Miami will win, but I'm not nearly as certain as I would be if Jacoby Brissett were coming into town. But obviously, they've got to win that game. They've got to win the 4 games against bad teams, twice against the Jets, obviously this coming Sunday, and at Cleveland. If you win those 4, my thinking with the way the AFC has evolved and with Denver playing well, my thinking is you have to win 2 of the 3 difficult games at Houston, at Green Bay, which comes first, and San Francisco. Are they capable of it? It's highly questionable. They're going to have the chance. I would say this: Denver is not going to be easy to catch in the sense that the Broncos' schedule, it's not terribly hard, but it's certainly not easy either. Denver, for folks to know, they have at Las Vegas versus Cleveland. Those should be 2 relatively easy games. Home to the Colts. So that's 3 games that are not terribly daunting. Then they're at the Chargers, at the Bengals, home to Kansas City. So the Broncos' next 3 games are their easiest of the 6 left. Then they close with 3 difficult ones at the Chargers, at the Bengals versus Kansas City. So if the Dolphins are within a game of Denver heading into December 22nd, that week 15, then I think the Dolphins have a chance. Beating the Chargers out is going to be difficult because such a gap now between 7-3 and 4-6, and I don't think either of us expect them to beat out Baltimore, that's sitting there at 7-4 for playoff berth. So it has to be Denver. Denver has to unravel, and the Dolphins, I think, need to win all but 1 or 2 remaining games.
All it takes is 1 injury for a team to unravel. If you look at the 49ers, you can blame and justify a lot of their issues on injury. So I'm not saying anything. It could be that injury could be on the Miami Dolphins. I'm sorry. The season changes. Teron Armstead goes down.
True.
So let's continue to watch, continue to monitor, but it seems like the Dolphins are digging themselves out of a hole. On that note, we will see you on Wednesday with another edition of Dolphins In Depth. Looking forward to seeing where this team is from a health standpoint. I expect Tyler Snoop Huntley to be back into the fold, open up that window, come back from IR, and it'll be interesting to see where this team is moving forward for the rest of the 2024 season. On that note, we will see you on Wednesday.